So John Squeo leads he's the strategy and principal director of the blockchain practice at Accenture and their health and life sciences practice. And if you look to his LinkedIn profile, it says, "Our health is our greatest gift, and my personal mission is to ensure we all have access to quality care." So blockchain applied to healthcare is about central to sort of improving the human condition through a technology. And John works on IoT, AI for healthcare, blockchain for healthcare, and data analytics. So he really is at the forefront of this kind of thinking for us in a large enterprise. So we're really excited to have him with us. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning. I also know I'm between you and lunch, so keeping that in mind, I'll jump right in. Can everyone hear me, including this microphone? We're good? Okay. Fantastic. So thank you for inviting me down. I wanted to talk a little bit today about something different than capital markets, something different than policy. So we'll get into actually some use cases and talk about what we're doing for a lot of our clients for the Global 2000. So a good C-level friend of mine gave me a book called Great Leaders Do Not Use PowerPoint. I haven't read it yet. So we're going to use PowerPoint today, and maybe I'll get around to doing that. So let's jump right in. So we're going to talk about the state of the industry and key learnings today. And I thought we'd break this up into state of the industry, some basics to kind of level set the room on what we're talking about. We'll get through that pretty quickly. Maybe you'll be able to have a firm foundation when you leave here on what are we really talking about when we say blockchain. Some consortia and how they really are helping to bind these ecosystems that are cross-industry, getting organizations that traditionally either compete or simply do not talk to each other and have really no interoperability or integration capabilities to be able to start to convene and talk about how they're going to transform across these ecosystems to really unlock value. And then we're going to drill down into a healthcare and life sciences lens and talk about some specific use cases that might be interesting, that certainly are making it real today. And then we'll hit on some key takeaways. So much like the commissioner, I have to also tell you that these are my views and opinions and not necessarily those of Accenture. So we'll go right into state of industry. So the Prime Minister of Canada said this at Davos, and I'm not sure if all of you heard it, and that is the pace of change will never be slower than it is today. And I don't know, do a lot of you agree with that statement? So I do, personally, and there's so many dynamics here that are accelerating change, but a lot of them are cultural, a lot of them are generational, a lot of them are internationalism, a lot of them are being unlocked by technologies that are enabling us to basically solve old problems with new tech. And leading into that, you know, what are some other allegories that we can talk about? Well, I started my journey kind of middle of the road there. I know we talked about IoT, we talked about analytics. I'm certainly involved in those. I started my journey on AI back in 2002 when I was working on a PhD in AI at Nova Southeastern. And you can see how low it is on that curve. It's the black line. We didn't have the compute power to do anything. So we did a lot of math, a whole lot of math. And you know, if you look at that, we've been working on AI since the 1950s. So we stand on the shoulder of giants in this field. But we had the math, but we really couldn't execute a lot of it to bring it to life. That is starting to change, and predictions are that by 2020, that's going to start to revolutionize our lives. And so when we get into these conferences about blockchain and distributed ledger, it's interesting because the patience level of when are we going to see reality in this is pretty low compared to where, you know, I've been on my journey with AI. And so I would just, you know, caution everyone to remain cognizant of the fact that this is a emerging technology. We're going to see all kinds of derivative capabilities come out of this and value be unlocked. But it's going to take some time. And so we can kind of crawl, then walk, then run all the time with 3 work streams simultaneously running in parallel about, you know, you guys here at Virginia Tech thinking of the huge, huge thing from an R&D perspective and academics. And then other organizations that we heard about today that are making it real, but are also thinking big. And then also organizations like mine that the remit really is from the Global 2000 make it real today, unlock value for us that we haven't seen before, and then we will crawl, walk, and run with you. So I think Brian already hit on this statistic from IDC, and that is the sector growth of 78%. So take that for what you will. It could be right, it could be wrong, but this is IDC's current projection. Blockchain is adaptable to disrupt many value chain ecosystems. So this is an eye chart, right? But what's important here is that it's just large. A lot of great minds are thinking about key use cases, really getting down to the narrow types of use cases that could be potentially disrupted in the short term, in that crawl phase. So this is not a limiting factor, excuse me, by any means, going the wrong way here. And this is just a thing saying, how can we make it real today? Where should we directionally be thinking? And maybe are there indicators out in the marketplace that have started to indicate that these are potential winning use cases that we could potentially use as a guidance as we go forward and introduce these to either government agencies or our enterprise clients and non-governmental agencies, et cetera. I will be focusing a little bit at the very end on health and life science because that is clearly my industry expertise and domain. But I wanted to make it clear that there are many other fields. I'm sure a lot of these domains are represented in this room where there are key use cases being discovered and capitalized on right now. So probably a lot of you have seen this, but this was the recently released Gartner hype cycle for blockchain that came out in September. And just directionally so that you know, I've circled a few of the ones that are most relevant to myself and to my group as we work operationally within North America, within health and life sciences. And really, you know, you got healthcare there kind of on the upside. You've got supply chain at the peak of it, which is interesting because there's actually supply chain use cases that are actually very mature. For the drug supply, the DSCSA regulation that is really being driven primarily by the FDA, that basically says that this month, in November, actually it's been slightly delayed, but in this month, it's scheduled that any wholesaler of a drug product has to be able to go to their shelf, scan the barcode, and know the provenance of that all the way back to the manufacturer. And in 2023, if you go to an inpatient pharmacy in a health system or a retail pharmacy, you'll be able to do the exact same exercise and be able to track that back. Well, this is real. This is actually being adopted. So why it's at the very top is interesting because it's distributed. Supply chain in itself is a very broad topic, but on that one use case, I would say it's even further down. And then insurance, we'll talk briefly about that. And government, I know we have a lot of people that are interested in government. I know my colleague John Stevens will be talking about that later, so we're going to touch on that. But the one at the very bottom, blockchain society and blockchain government, kind of combines because we have a lot of interest in decentralized identity. And we think that that's a very disruptive technology. And that, while that's not explicitly called out there, we feel that those two, that entire very broad type of use case might be indicated by both of those points on that curve. So in the spirit of making it real, what's real? KTDI, known traveler. This is something that Accenture has directly worked on and in partnership with the ministry of the foreign ministries for Canada and the Netherlands. It involves Air France, Air Canada, KLM Airlines. It involves basically hotels that have to participate into this, or hotel networks have to participate into this blockchain. What this means is, it's basically, think of it as a digital passport, where you can actually go in an accelerated fast-track passport lane in Toronto, in Montreal, so these are the three cities, Montreal, Toronto, and Amsterdam. Go ahead and introduce yourself with a digital wallet, and it will essentially do the same thing that you would normally do with the passport control window, and accelerate that entire process the whole way through city to city. So this is a real use case in production, and it's super exciting. Another one is the risk stream. This is one that's going to be very disruptive within the property and casualty insurance space. So this one is formatively real. They are focused on, initially, the first notice of loss and also proof of insurance. So today, it's just a circus of telephone calls from agency to agency, from carrier to carrier to say, hey, an accident occurred, here's some additional info about it, and let's play phone tag and get that process working. And this is for every single auto accident you can imagine, every single type of casualty claim that may start to occur. And then, okay, well, that's done. Now I'm notified. Now let's do a proof of insurance. And oftentimes imagine how many different insurance carriers there might be involved in a particular casualty event. So this is a way, let's get it all in a transparent manner up to a single blockchain, and let's, within a permissioned realm, and we'll talk about that, and let's discuss, or let's go ahead and accelerate that process. It unlocks a tremendous amount of value and waste, particularly in labor time and potential errors as well. Digital 2020. So ID 2020 is a partnership that Accenture did with Microsoft, and this is really just to create a foundational identity for refugees that do not have governmental issued ID. So based on biometrics, huge value unlock for each of these citizens that were kind of pseudo-citizens because they didn't have any ID. So when you think about the R&D that us and a lot of our competitors and academics are doing in the decentralized ID space, fundamentally it comes back to who am I, who told me who I am, and how can I modify that as I go through my life events where that might change, name, et cetera. And can I control that? Or is it some other entity that controls it? And if it is, like the current state, what if they don't give me an identity? Then what do I do? So these are the types of really interesting questions that this has driven. It drove a lot of the technology development, and now it's a time to rethink the idea of, okay, in a highly westernized, developed country, can we also use that same paradigm to unlock further value? So, just some basics here. So really, what is blockchain? Might be a topic for debate here, but really, computerized database called a ledger, right? Dispersed among all participants that might be participating. So this is kind of how I explain it to my grandma. It can hold data that is beneficial to share amongst participants that have limited trust of each other. Trust is the key. We'll go through that in a way, but ideally, if it's entirely within a domain enterprise and it's completely locked down, probably not a good use case for blockchain. If it's amongst participants that have potentially unlocked or trapped value in sharing or commingling data or having transparency of the data, this then has an automated way of ensuring that people are keeping real to that ledger and that they're not altering the ledger without knowledge of the others. And then allow each of them to share only the data they want to share. This is the security component of it. So we'll show that in a permissioned blockchain, this is a key element, because I might put a lot out there, but I may only want it unlocked for viewability by a particular cohort of participants in that blockchain, not for everybody. And in a very high level, on the left-hand side, you'll see this is how a lot of data exchanges work today. So there's a trusted entity, they have the governance, they say what's going to be exchanged. This is non-blockchain on the left. They say this is the data elements we'll exchange, and if you want to join us, you can take it or leave it, and that's what you can do. And so we'll control the data model, essentially. We'll control the data flow. It'll flow through our switches or our exchanges, and you can be a subscriber and lease that capability. Okay, well, a lot of organizations, and we're seeing this in different consortia, are saying, we don't want to do that anymore. We are close enough to the data ourselves. We can spin up a server with a common technology to all the rest of our peers that provide value or similar types of data. We can do this ourselves. Well, we're going to talk about some limiting factors in doing that. But the key here is you still need a trusted entity at the middle, even if they're not going to control the data model anymore, even if they're not going to control the actual data exchange on the network. There still has to be someone in the middle that can break it that can fix it when it breaks. There still has to be someone in the middle that can try to get consensus among the different parties about the rules, about the data model, about changes. So it's interesting that there might be opportunities for those organizations that are intermediaries today to migrate and take on this new trusted capability role, even though part of their responsibilities and roles may actually change and transform into the blockchain. Why would they want to do this? A lot of organizations just are starting to realize that their data itself is exchangeable for value, whereas before it was just more of a function for operations for their general value creation in their value chain. It gives them closer proximity to the data sources. Basically, if the data sources used to come in through the trusted intermediary and then only the organization that was consuming it would see it, well, what if they could just cut out the middleman and say, no, let's just let our customers or clients just tell us directly. Okay, well, the capability really wasn't there before to do that at scale. And then, of course, provenance, we all know, I think, where it came from, where that data has been. And then basically the idea of, can we reveal the answer that needs to be revealed without having to actually reveal the data? This is like zero knowledge proof. Something like to say, am I 21? Well, right now I prove it with my driver's license, which shows my date, my eye color, a lot of information that I don't feel is necessary to answer the question. What if there was a trusted source where I could just say, yes, I am 21, trust the badge that's on this that says they know I'm 21, but I don't have to supply all the other metadata that's on my driver's license. So something like that. So this is, I think, a key slide here. And this is really, I heard out in the hallway about, do you have any guidelines? Does organizations like us have point of views on what we should think about with blockchain? Well, here's one, and that is really characteristics of a blockchain use case. So when you're sitting with your peers, your colleagues, your clients, and you're being a trusted advisor in any way, I would say you can follow this line of reasoning to get to that question really clearly. Is this a use case for blockchain? And that is there value in sharing data with a partnership? And this is all external to your organization typically. Are there multiple parties involved, right? Is there mistrust between the parties? And mistrust may mean, do you trust the other party 100%? If it's 1% less than that, then there's probably mistrust. So this is not, and there's clearly a stratification of mistrust. You might have cohorts, for instance, in the healthcare industry, where we have accredited hospitals that are accredited by an organization. Well, we might understand that if they're accredited, they've met a minimal level of security, they've met a minimal level of policies that they must have. So there's probably a reasonable amount of trust to have with a cohort like that organizationally. Very different than maybe another type of organization that's not subject to that level of accreditation. So there might be a stratification of trust, but nevertheless, we could say that with an external partner, particularly competitor, there's still a limitation of trust, even if we trust that they may have the minimal threshold of necessary capabilities to be an organization. So that's one of the keys. And then, will the parties be able to agree to rules for sharing access? Obviously, if they can't agree on the rules, we're never going to make any progress whatsoever on creating a good, viable blockchain. If any of the answers to that are yes, then it continues to follow. If some of the answers are no, then we probably can do this via traditional methods much, much more effectively than utilizing the overhead of introducing a blockchain. As we heard, it's really emergent technology, lots of R&D to do. So we'd love to accelerate the capability and get an organization working, solving their pain points, and not necessarily dogmatically trying to get in the solution with blockchain at all. So what types of blockchain are we talking about? Well, there's the permissionless. We've heard a lot about Bitcoin today. We've heard a lot about capital markets that may also kind of get into this realm of all parties need to be able to have access. That is not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about much more permissioned blockchains. So this is a cohort of founding partners that then will convene a governance model to think about who else that they should invite in that meets their level of necessary criteria. We're thinking about a federated one, which is external. On the right-hand side, you'll see permissioned, which is more private. And that is probably not a very good use for blockchain because that's within an organization in and of itself. Could be used, probably not. They could probably do that via more effectively via traditional methods. It's the one that's the sweet spot's in the middle. External partners, permissioned, cohorts, governance. And then at the very bottom, we have this idea of mutualized data versus this value transfer or tokenized digital types of data. And very much in the health and life sciences realm, and also some of the other industries I put up there, we're typically on the mutualized data, which is much more integration of data, pooling data, having transparency of being able to view data to unlock value. So while all of these are viable methods of blockchain, oftentimes in an enterprise value unlock type of project or engagement, we're going to be oftentimes right in the middle, and then number one, mutualized data. I'm going to skip through some of these to get some more interesting things. When we get to forming a consortia, we think about governance, right? And we think about the rules, the common rules that have to be really created and then maintained to keep a sustainable, adopted type of network going. And some of the benefits that we talk about with blockchain is this holistic view, transparency, so I see what you see, and speed, right? So the idea here is that instead of going up and down these different value chains through intermediaries that need processing time and integration time, can we just somehow optimize the rule set to where within the network itself, we can exchange what we want to exchange and then ideally power workflows via smart contracts, right? So there's a huge potential to unlock a speed opportunity there. And then security, right? It's audible, it's immutable. We've heard about that today. But some of the challenges are privacy. Some things just shouldn't be put on a blockchain. Trade secrets, while their security is endemic to blockchain, maybe we just simply don't want to risk it at its current state of security. PHI is a perfect example of that. So private health information, personal health information, is something that we probably do not want to put on a blockchain. But there's many other types of adjacent types of data that maybe unlock value for patients in health and life science that is appropriate at this level of security. Implementation, scalability, and latency and protection. I think these are all the key things that you have to have agreement on before you actually implement the technology amongst those participants. And I've heard a lot of different paradigms, but one of the interesting ones that I've heard is it's kind of like, a professional sports game. You spend 55 minutes doing the governance and then 5 minutes actually implementing the tech. And I think that really holds true. And we go right back to the patience aspect. A lot of organizations don't necessarily want to take or have the patience or the appetite to invest in 55 minutes of investing into agreements, both legal agreements, process agreements, data model agreements, and then go ahead and try to show a proof of concept that this stuff actually works. Oftentimes they're trying to invert that process, and that's where we get into problems, and that's where we see a lot of shelfware proof of concept blockchain projects today, and then the adoptability is being made a little more difficult. And I think that goes right into the believability of it. It's like, well, we did it and it didn't work, and therefore we're moving on and we discount the potential for this technology. And in fact, we're seeing the bigger successes, the bigger prevalence for opportunity and a sustained adoption in the organizations that have said, no, we are going to really drive into the governance. So the idea here is get an accelerator, right? If you're going to do this, make sure you've got a good ecosystem architect, and that's an ecosystem not only of the technology, but also of the governance model. Industrialize it. Make sure that you're following the right aspects, that permissioned area, federated area, and then choose the right mutualized versus tokenized types of models that are necessary for that particular use case. And then really, really, really spend a lot of time on governance and diagnose and repair types of scenarios, like who's going to fix it, who's going to hold the common key to be able to ensure that all the servers are running identically, that all the change management is being implemented identically so that this network stays consistent. And the compliance implementation. Capacity planning is another key aspect, right? Because when you're running these systems, you can really quickly run out of capacity, and we're starting to see that in certain launches of some of the consortia that I mentioned up there earlier. So in the healthcare lens, we're not going to drain this slide. I think the most important thing is the purple bar at the top, just to tell you how we are making it real. So while EHRs and health information may not be the thing that we're focused on to disrupt with blockchain, what about provider credentialing? This is data that's already out there, that's public. It's just integrated very poorly. You got all these organizations calling on the same doctor's office, the same universities to make sure they have their licenses, the same certification bodies, and why? When they could essentially share that data. And in fact, you could create a marketplace that could also compensate the owners of that verified information. Provider directories, this is one where you go in your insurance company and you say, is my doctor in network? And you pull it down, and we understand that there's a bad level of precision there. This is also public information. There's no trade secrets. So this is another place where a very large consortia is also disrupting this realm. Consent management on the far right is one that I think is really interesting. And in fact, I'll click over and I'll show you that our life sciences use cases, which is more pharma and medtech, it's also there on the far right. Informed consent management is a huge opportunity to unlock value. Well, what is it? First of all, it is the idea that patients who sign today this big blanket agreement to say, I allow my data to be shared in this manner, can now say, I allow my data to be shared with that particular investigator or that particular doctor, and I can revoke that in near time. It also says, now that we get all the informed consents in one big pool, or at least a resolver that says it's there, we can now conform to like the CCDA in California or the GDPR in Europe, to where if that patient wants to be forgotten, we now know where those documents reside, and we can now go find them and also delete them. So a lot of consortia out there that are forming, Synaptic, Provider Directories, Procredix, the IBM Health Utility Network is forming, Coalesce. These are actual organizations, all those logos that are getting together and trying to make this technology real. Also in life sciences, there's a couple key ones. MediLedger, they're solving for track and trace, which I mentioned is the response to the DSCSA regulation for tracking and tracing pharmaceuticals. Melody, which is drug discovery. So these are fantastic places to go if you want to see stuff that's actually happening today that's going to be disrupting these particular use cases in near time. So some of the key takeaways I'll just leave you with is blockchain's emergence as a disruptive innovation is real and is already changing some enterprise processes. And it is important to know how to distinguish when to use a blockchain or distributed ledger and when not to. And then know the key roles and operations that must be facilitated to form and run consortia across complex enterprise ecosystems. That's those benefits, the challenges, the roles, and the responsibilities that are going to transform. And lastly, understand the use cases and consortia in your industries of interest that are unlocking trapped value, and build a strategy to solve old problems with new tech, such as using blockchain or distributed ledger. Thank you very much.
We have lunch in just a couple minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience for John?
Yeah.
John, have you seen any sort of convergence or cross-pollination with Internet of Things, pacemakers, AV monitors, as well as AI? Do you see that coming in the near term, 3 to 5 years or anything like that? Hey, John, will you repeat the question?
Yeah, happy to repeat the question. So if I got the question right, do we see some kind of interconnectivity between what we're seeing on blockchain development and what we're seeing with IoT? And the answer is yes. In fact, I'm working on a group within the IEEE right now that's taking that on precisely and developing standards to try to link the world of IoT and many of the remote sensors and output of that sensors into a ledger. And oftentimes it's bifurcated to the traditional databases, and oh, by the way, let's also send it to a ledger to see how we can transform that. So it's not completely replacing a lot of the traditional databases, but we're trying to create a standard to where you can send it to both, and then we can see how innovation can then accelerate using both techniques. So, yeah.
Time for maybe one more question? You're all hungry, aren't you?
Yeah.
All right.